that actually tells them we can save this money and be safer, not we have to juggle saving the money or having security. No, saving the money and having security is what we're about.
How do you mean in terms of the security angle? So what would you be your sort of answer for security, supposed security needs?
Yeah, if we take one of the things that this treaty will do, the intention is that it will prohibit the use, deployment, manufacture, transporting, proliferation, transfer, stockpiling of nuclear weapons, and require their total elimination. So it has an obligation on elimination. We recognise non-nuclear countries can't eliminate the weapons because they don't have them, but non-nuclear countries can prohibit the weapons and all the activities. Now, it's the manufacture, the deployment, the stockpiling of nuclear weapons that are the most dangerous activities. If we are not going to replace Trident, that already opens a window where we can say we don't actually have to be taking if we can see a point in the near future of not having Trident because we make a decision not to replace, then we immediately ought to be in a position to be saying that means we don't have to have the nuclear submarines going out on their so-called continuous at sea deterrent patrols. That then means the submarines can we're not risking submarine accidents. The warheads get separated from the missiles, the warheads get stored. I've talked to the Scottish, they'd be prepared for Coolport base to be used solely as a storage base, pending elimination, but they're not happy about it being continuing to be used as a stockpiling place where they're stockpiled in a form that is live and able to be put onto missiles. So we raise those issues. We raise, therefore, that if you're not carrying the warheads, if you're not deploying the warheads, if you're not storing live warheads, we are much safer. If you stop doing all of that, we are much safer. And again, depending on whether you are prepared to respond if they say, what about terrorists, to say, look, we aren't necessarily buying into that rhetoric, but the fact is, if you think there's a concern about terrorists, you better understand that one of the things that they'd be keen to get are, or to attack would be nuclear warheads or nuclear materials, because that would make a very big terrorist impact. Now, one of the things that I always say, and I think I did get that across on that radio thing, is that actually anyone who contemplates using nuclear weapons is a terrorist, in the sense that nuclear weapons are inherently terrorist weapons. They are designed, deterrence has the word terror in it.
For mass
they
extinction.
Are designed
for mass extinction.
Yes, they risk that, but they're designed to make the other side feel so terrified of you that you control the behaviour of the other side. So I think we do have every right to say we don't want to be defended by any terror weapons.
Yes. It's only that it's a good range of information there, but precisely the Trident you're picking on. Now, I've said this before, which is not very popular around there. I support nuclear power, because I don't think you can save the planet without it. It's gone to such an extreme degree. And to clean the atmospheres and oceans, to have sufficient power is about the only way is nuclear power. Well, that's not the point though. I do not want Trident around here, and I don't want those aircraft carriers with nuclear weapons on them. I don't want that. That stuff is to be scrapped. It's terrible expensive, and it is an imperial capitalist regime doing ownership of Middle Eastern oil, ownership of everything in South Africa, although Rio Tinto and Anglo-American Corporation.
Right.
That's backed up by a global power, and that's why they want global weapons, you see. So is it not possible to identify long-term powers in politics, families identifiable, that want these super weapons? I just say one more thing as an example. The Astor family is always a big empire of both New York and London. And always had big people both sides of the water. They all supported China coast trade, pushing the opium. They drugged the planet up that way. It was the first time the American fleet joined in with the British Navy and the Foreign Enterprise to run the China coastal ports. Well, that was back then, the Astors. The Astors going through, they bought the Times newspaper group here. And later on, they sold to Lord Thompson a fleet, I think in the 1960s. They still are presidents for life of the Times Publishing Group. Now, they influenced press and everything. They always wanted big weapons, and they always wanted big empires. And right now, David Cameron is married to the stepdaughter of Viscount Astor. Same ones in the government all the time, both sides of the water. They're the ones who really motivate big nuclear powers and big weapons, you know, and more attention paid to influences in government. The Anglo-American establishment across the Atlantic. It used to be much better known in the 19th and early 20th century than it is now. It's the same people.
Yeah.
You can learn it from biographies.
I mean, I certainly do not discount at all the role. I would put it more as big business,
Yes,
and dominant business leaders have always had, been hand in glove with them. I mean, Eisenhower himself referred to the military-industrial complex. So I'm certainly not discounting that. I think in terms of strategy and tactics, it's because you can end up getting into a very personalised argument. I mean, Rupert Murdoch, all of those, they support nuclear weapons. And they support nuclear weapons because it is also about hegemony in the world. The five that, were the first nuclear armed states and then agreed a treaty to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, but didn't really take on the obligation to disarm for themselves. They are now joined by four others, but the fact is that those five are still the ones that consider that they should be the ones by and large in charge of the world, and they're on the Security Council. So we do have to be aware of that as part of our analysis, I suspect. But I think why I mentioned Lockheed Martin is because they are, I prefer us to be going after the company Lockheed Martin and the company Serco that are tied up with Aldermas, and the other one is Jacobs Engineering, which is another American military, mainly military, but also engineering and industrial complex. Because I think we keep ourselves very clean if we are clearly holding them accountable in terms of what they do, what they're doing now, in terms of the activities, that we can be very clear about what they're doing, and if we can find in the financial skullduggery, that all is absolutely right to expose. To go into the family stuff, to me, weakens our arguments. So I personally wouldn't go down that track, but it's obviously your choice whether you do or not.
Well, the one is very parallel to the other.
I'm going to make a point myself now. I wanted to take a step back and talk a bit about strategy a bit more, because we've rushed into tactics about Burfield and Bedford a little bit, and I've been going on various anti-war and peace activities for the best part of over 35 years, and I look at the situation today and I think, what are the new ingredients? And in the 1980s in particular, you had a situation where you really had to we put getting on for 1 million people on the streets in some of the CND demonstrations in the 1980s, but it didn't actually it helped rally public opinion, but it didn't fundamentally stop the government doing what it was going to do. It seems to me the new ingredients in the situation, after the first time in my lifetime of activity, you've actually got a Labour leadership enthusiastically committed, not just reluctantly committed, but enthusiastically committed to the idea of nuclear disarmament. However, this process has to be worked through a party structure which has historically set its face against all of that. So it seems to me that one of the new ingredients we should be thinking about in terms of strategy, we have this leadership in the party that wants to go in a certain direction. We have a party that may well be reluctant about this. There are a number of forces and things at stake here, one of which is, for example, one of the problems I think the Corbyn leadership faces in the Labour Party, and it's not just a Labour Party problem, is the reluctance of some of the key trade unions involved in making nuclear weapons to embrace the arguments that he's been putting up for the last 30 years. Now, as I say, you don't have to be a member of the Labour Party to worry about this. You could be a trade unionist, and quite a lot of people here are. How do we, tackle the problem of Unite, who on other issues in relation to the Corbyn leadership have been quite supportive, to get them, to actually at least move away from, passive opposition or even active opposition to where Corbyn's at on this. Secondly, I think, now this is a problem more for the Labour Party, you will see the kind of stuff that Paul Mason has been writing in the last couple of weeks, which is, we want a Labour government, we want an alternative to austerity. It could be sooner than we think because Cameron and co are on the ropes. Let's drop all this nuclear stuff and get on and win the popular argument on austerity and get Labour into power. That's going to be very attractive to a whole bunch of people, not to me and not to people here, but very attractive to a whole bunch of people who think that the nuclear issue is a kind of ideological, London-centric, it's not a bread and butter issue on the streets of Grimsby, etc., etc. So I think there's a little bit of strategising that needs to be done around those issues too.
Can I respond, and then it would be interesting to... Okay, first of all, in the 1980s, actually you're wrong, the INF Treaty came very directly out of the refusal to accept the deployment of Cruise and Pershing by the West, Greenham Common in particular, and as was, Gorbachev paid direct tribute to Greenham Common and also the European peace movement. So the Greenham Common for the UK had the major influence, and the German sort of Greens plus religious groups actually had the major influence there. And this is what, the analysis does show that although Thatcher did her absolute utmost to deny that when they did have this treaty, she said it was negotiation from strength, she hated it when, the Americans and Gorbachev basically acknowledged that they were responding to an emergency situation in which part of that emergency was how, the peace movement had refused to allow this deployment to go ahead, and also had highlighted the dangers, and that included the nuclear winter danger. So I just want to correct that impression that that what we did in the 80s didn't have actual effect, because it did. It had the treaty in 1987 that began a lot of the unravelling. To situate the debate in terms of the fact that internationally there's over 130 UN member states that are moving towards banning. Because why do you get people like, saying, let's just ditch the nuclear stuff because that's contentious stuff, and we, on everything else, we, on austerity and on everything else, we unite. It's a carefully constructed narrative that, taking on nuclear weapons is a vote loser. Look how quickly that narrative was completely undermined in Scotland. One of the most militarily inclined parts of the British Isles. So it's not, if the argument can be made, but the argument has to be underpinned effectively. Unfortunately, is going to be, we don't have to make the big spending decisions now. So delay, kick them down and certainly that's one of the things that I was arguing, that they shouldn't sign any major contracts. They should refuse to be fooled into this so-called main gate decision, because it's not what it pretends to be. So it's the kind of delay thing, and I think that would allow for some discussion about how the UK should participate in multilateral nuclear disarmament, and we should be encouraging that. But also that the delay, they need to engage the unions, because Barrow is a one industry town now. That was deliberate. When Vickers, now BAE, took over. It used to have diverse shipbuilding and various other. It was deliberately because they thought, I think, it was easier to control for a variety of reasons. If it was just doing defence contracts. British Aerospace is way behind on the contracts for Astute. So Labour actually has a good 10 years, if they said they are not going to sign these contracts for Trident, not until they see, what's happening internationally, etc. They then would have at least 10 years. Now we have to work with the unions on the diversification, and Jeremy knew, this is what I thought you were talking about when you talked about Lucas, that they are getting new analyses done. Part of that new analysis has to be about diversifying so that there's civilian industries, startups, etc., etc. A small amount of investment combined with taking the heavyweight hand of British aerospace, which is highly inefficient as an employer, off of the kind of control they have in Barrow, would mean that even within 5 years we'd be seeing some real alternatives. So that's part of the argument to use with the unions. But look at the Tata Steel thing. There are 5,000 jobs at risk in places like Port Talbot. And that's, 5 times more than the jobs associated with Trident. And yet, so why aren't we actually pointing that out to the unions? Look, we will support you, unions, in looking at how to manage the transition from Barrow being a one-horse, military submarine, nuclear submarine only employer into being a diverse employer, which may or may not continue to include some military. The astute submarines are not meant to be military armed. Of course, if you don't have to have Trident, you really probably don't need astute either, to be really truthful. Astute mainly is, a nuclear-powered submarine, by and large, to accompany and support and protect Trident in various different kinds of ways. So that changes a lot of other things, which I think also should feed into a Stop the War analysis, which is what we really need to be looking at is security differently. And it is about the security of our environment and the security of our social services, the security of people's social lives. That's an argument that I don't feel the anti-nuclear movement or the traditional anti-nuclear movement has made effectively enough. That is a strategic argument that should be being made with Labour to a far higher degree, and you should be going to the trade unions and say, you are fiscally irresponsible if you carry on backing Barrow for nuclear submarines when the rest of the world is trying to ban them, and not spending these precious few years in doing the work with the workforce at Barrow and of Rolls-Royce in Derby and a couple of other places that rely to identify and build up the jobs you need to be doing. I want us to be calling those unions irresponsible in terms of the jobs, irresponsible in terms of security, and irresponsible in terms of finance.
Perhaps we have to help them a little bit by making the transitional arrangements clearer.
Yeah, which is what
you were saying about earlier.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, you're saying that there's only 1,000 jobs based in the nuclear weapons industry in the whole of the UK, or just in Barrow? Or?
No, but basically 1,000 dedicated nuclear jobs. It's not nearly as much. There's a lot of support jobs in places like Barrow and also Faslane, but those support jobs, they're catering and construction and various things. Those jobs, if you do the transition, again, I did when I was living up in Scotland for a couple of years in 2006 and 2007 with Faslane 365. We actually did some of the looking at that locally with the University of Strathclyde. Did a very good analysis, and they basically said if you brought in some light industry making use of the Lochside location, which again with Barrow is making use of that, you can get tidal, you can get wind, you can get those some renewable energy things. You set up the companies, you set up the testing, you set up the manufacture there, and you attract jobs in. And you make sure that those support jobs, the specialised jobs for the nuclear stuff, nobody in Faslane as such, or hardly anyone, can do any of that. So those jobs, they'll lose their jobs only if there's a sudden pull out, like there was at Holy Lock.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to take Alistair.
Yeah, I would say